Welcome back to the 6Ps podcast. Today we continue our unit on Macbeth, and today we're going to look at essay writing. So the basics of essay writing, well, firstly, this is a text response essay. So it's a sustained, extended response based on one specific text. You should be looking to write between 900 to 1200 words approximately. And again, we need to explore the ramifications of a specific question. Obviously, the main purpose of an essay is just not to show off your analytical skills, but also your knowledge of the text. And we do this through quotations, analysis of language features, structure, and style as well. So when it comes to planning, obviously you'll be responding to a particular question, and it's really important that you formulate a contention or a main opinion or a main idea on that specific question or statement. So you could agree or disagree with it. You could partially agree. If it's a to what extent question, it might be to some extent, to a major extent, or to a full extent, or perhaps even to a limited extent. So looking at the two topics we looked at in class, one contention for the first topic could be that Macbeth is the true villain in the play. For the second topic, you might write that Lady Macbeth is responsible for the tragedy in the play, as is, and you could reference other characters or other ideas there as well. Again, it's a clear response to a question. Now, your arguments or your reasons are what support your contention. So, consider adding the word because on the end of your contention. For example, the first one, Macbeth is a true villain in the play because, and we could say he's overly ambitious, he relies on the supernatural, he commits regicide, he's far too easily persuaded, or he becomes extremely violent as he gains more and more power. Obviously, we only need 3 reasons or arguments here as well. For the second one, it's a little bit more clear-cut. So Lady Macbeth is responsible for the tragedy in the play, as is perhaps the witches, as is Macbeth. We could look at ideas, as is Macbeth's ambition, as is the lust and need for power and greed throughout the setting. Again, it could be a range of responses, but it's really important we have a clear contention and a couple of arguments to support that will allow us to flesh out the contention, really analyse the contention in far more depth and detail. Speaking of planning, it's really important that you plan out your evidence as well. So it's not just your arguments you want to plan out, it's evidence as well, because you don't want to find you're relying on the same characters or quotations even. We definitely don't want to repeat quotations. It's okay to talk about the same character a couple of times, but we definitely don't want to repeat a quotation in our text. Again, we want to avoid reusing examples and quotations and even language features. We want to showcase a broad and detailed knowledge of the text. Remember, you can consult your quotation sheets and resources on the OneNote as well for this. Let's look at an introduction. These are the things that you should be looking to do in your introduction. The first one is to introduce the text, and you might do this through a brief plot description or even some context information if you want to as well. That's how I like to do it. You should be stating your contention and answering the topic and outlining your arguments, your ideas, and your reasons in a logical order. So there should be a clear sequence to your ideas and your arguments. It could be in chronological order. Sometimes students like to start with their best piece of analysis at the start, or it could even be that you initially agree with the topic, but ultimately you disagree with it. And again, you want to make sure you're clearly sequencing your ideas. The last point I wanted to reference is written expression. We really need to make sure that we're being really clear in how we write, not just our introduction, but all our paragraphs, and maintain that really nice formal tone throughout. This is a general template for an introduction, and again, this is just a template. There are no right and wrong ways to go about this. So for example, I like to start my first sentence with either a plot description or some context information and then go into my contention. Other students I like to get stuck straight into their contention, and that's okay. The main thing, as I said, is that you address the topic, you have a clear contention, and you outline your arguments. And remember, we don't need to go into any detail with our arguments. We don't need to bring in our quotations. We don't need to bring in our evidence. We just need to simply outline our arguments. And again, in that logical order. You might like to use a final sentence to comment on the main message of the play and what the playwright is endorsing, particularly if that's in relation to your topic. We obviously don't want to go off topic with this last sentence, but again, it's optional. I definitely encourage you to play around with templates for your introduction, but again, make sure the plot description or the context information, if you are going to use it, is relevant to the essay topic. So if you are talking about Macbeth being the true villain of the play, your context information shouldn't be about, say, gender, for example, and how women were suppressed in this society, because it's going to make no sense at all. So again, make sure that that is relevant. Let's look at an example of an introduction based on the topic of ambition. This is about a mid-range one. So in William Shakespeare's Macbeth, the tragic hero states that vaulting ambition is the only spur to his murder of King Duncan. However, there are many factors that motivate Macbeth, including the witch's prophecy and Lady Macbeth's powerful urgings. Once king, Macbeth creates a state of terror in Scotland, resulting more from his own fear for his future than from any ambition. It is when ambition is combined with these other factors that Macbeth feels compelled to act both violently and immorally, and this leads inevitably to his tragic demise. So they've addressed the topic really clearly here. They've gone with obviously ambition, but it's not just ambition that motivates Macbeth, it's also the witch's prophecy and Lady Macbeth's urging. They then discuss briefly the consequences of this, but again, the key term ambition is used a couple of times. Notice they've used a quotation or two quotations really early in their introduction. There's no hard and fast rules. I like to avoid quotations in my introduction. Others don't mind them. Again, it's up to you, but I'll personally like to save my quotations for my main body paragraphs. In this essay topic, I believe the quote was actually in the topic as well, and please make sure you use that somewhere in your essay. If there is a quotation in your topic, you do need to use it somewhere. Treat it as a free quotation. I like to try and get mine into the first main body paragraph, but again, there's no hard and fast rules about this. But this is about a mid-range, I felt. Let's have a look at a second example, which is more of a high range response in relation to the topic about Macbeth being the real villain in the play. William Shakespeare's play Macbeth traces the eponymous protagonist's swift rise to power in 11th century Scotland. The playwright depicts the significant violence, death and destruction, and initially presents Lady Macbeth as a predominant evil character who instigates the pain and suffering. However, the protagonist's penchant for violence and his reliance on killing innocent victims leads him to become the real villain of the play. Additionally, his continual seeking out of the supernatural underscores his dark and disturbing psyche. Ultimately, Shakespeare condemns tyrannical and violent leaders, especially those who immorally usurp the throne, a highly regarded and respected position. Once again, if we look at these ideas, we've got the idea that Lady Macbeth is initially the evil character. However, it's Macbeth's violent nature and his reliance on killing innocent victims that leads to him becoming the real victim, and as well as that, the third idea about him continually seeking out the supernatural, and you'd have a paragraph on the supernatural. I do think the vocabulary here is a little bit more sophisticated, perhaps it is a little bit over the top, but the main thing is that the three ideas have been clearly outlined in this introduction, and they finished off with some of that context information, the idea that being a king, or the position of a king, was highly regarded and respected. They were obviously seen as being or having the voice or being selected by God. It was really holy and divine position in 17th century England at the time. So with main body paragraphs, this is obviously where you flesh out each argument. And you do that by including a range of evidence to showcase a detailed knowledge of the text. Analyse and explain your evidence and look to show how it strengthens your arguments. Now, with your evidence, we're obviously not just focused on quotations. For Macbeth, we want to also look at things like stage directions. We want to look at language, at imagery as well, particularly in this text. And lastly, make sure we're always remaining on topic. And in our explanations, we should always make sure we're always looking at the paragraph topic and the essay topic. And obviously, we want to link back to the essay topic at the end of each main body paragraph. And you can do that quite explicitly just to highlight or underscore that you are looking at the topic. And we know VCAR very much look at to ensure that students remain on topic. This is, again, just a template for a main body paragraph, looking at teal. Do you need to use this specifically? No, you don't. I like having clear and explicit topic sentences and links, and in between that, it's really up to you. In Year 11, we want to be looking to include at least 2 pieces of evidence per argument, and again, making sure we're explaining that in really, really good depth. Again, we're not just looking for quotations. We also want to use those other language features like imagery or symbols or stage directions to show, again, that broader knowledge of the text. Make sure your topic sentences are really clear. So, for example, the playwright explores, Shakespeare depicts, the play examines, Macbeth highlights. Make sure those ideas are really, really explicitly outlined in those topic sentences. Let's have a look at an example, which is a mid to high range. This idea is that the witches are to blame. Macbeth's initial meeting with the witches influences many of his subsequent thoughts and reactions. It means, for instance, that when Ross addresses him as Thane of Cawdor, he thinks almost at once of becoming king, as the greatest is behind. This signals that Glamis and Cawdor are for him simply stepping stones to the throne. Macbeth's ambition is evident here, just as it is in his aside, when he refers to his thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical. Already, he has considered murdering Duncan, but his desire to become king is now strengthened by the witch's prophecy and its early partial fulfilment. Without this prophecy, Macbeth would like a sense that the throne was somehow his rightful destiny. This feeling, soon to be powerfully endorsed by Lady Macbeth, leads Macbeth to act against the moral code, which in turn is a crucial factor in his eventual demise. So it's clear here that the witch's influence, or the initial meeting with the witches, is the idea in this paragraph. We've got some quotations here as well. The idea of ambition is mentioned. We know in this particular topic it's about ambition, so it's good that they've included that. And they've also included some next level analysis. They've used the word aside to show, I guess, a structural feature of the play as well, but they've remained on topic throughout, and that's really important here. Let's look at the second example, which is more of a high range, and this is about the supernatural. Shakespeare examines the ramifications of unnatural deeds through the female protagonist. Although Lady Macbeth appears to be devoid of guilt after the murder of Duncan, she suffers greatly towards the end of the play. Following her husband's murderous rampage, Lady Macbeth is overcome with remorse and a shadow of her former self, haunted by her involvement in Macbeth's crimes. Shakespeare's inclusion of rhyme in Lady Macbeth's speech maintains her association with the witches and therefore evil. The Thane of Fife had a wife. The Doctor highlights the unnatural nature of sleepwalking, continuing the connection between guilt and lack of sleep in the play. Sleep deprivation, guilt and fear have driven Lady Macbeth to the point of madness. Like her husband, she too hallucinates, crying, "Out, damn spot, out," in her restless sleep. The imagined and unyielding blood is a clear symbol of her wrongdoing, and ironic, given her earlier declaration that a little water clears us of this deed. Shakespeare increases the impact of Lady Macbeth's demise with a suggestion of her suicide through the stage directions denoting a cry within of woman, thus demonstrating the extent of her anguish. Ultimately, the playwright condemns Lady Macbeth's actions by depicting her inner conflict. Again, we've got a clear idea. We're talking about Lady Macbeth and her guilt. We've got lots of evidence included in here, not just quotations. We've got the idea of rhyme. We've also got the idea of a symbol being sleep and blood. We've got 2 motifs there as well. And then we've got a stage direction too. So we've got a wide range of evidence here. And again, they continue to be on topic, talking about guilt and Lady Macbeth's guilt and her inner conflict throughout this piece. Again, the vocabulary is quite complex and sophisticated, so that's why it ticks that high range box. With your conclusion, all you want to do here is to restate your contention and outline your arguments, and you really want to avoid bringing in any new information or evidence. A statement I like to say about a conclusion is you definitely can't gain marks from a conclusion. No examiner ever reads a conclusion and go, "Wow, that conclusion is absolutely amazing." but you can definitely lose marks if you go against any of this. If you want to, you might want to finish off with your strongest argument or piece of analysis. It's really not necessary though. I always think it's sort of, you get in and get out. You state the main pieces of information, you bring in nothing new. And again, I avoid using evidence, but again, some students like to use the same quote from their intro in their conclusion as a way to sort of showcase that circular nature of their essay. But again, it's not necessary. Looking at this example, Macbeth is clearly ambitious and his desire for the Scottish throne is evident from early in the play. The witch's prophecy leads him to feel that, once he is Thane of Cawdor, he will inevitably become king. Lady Macbeth not only reinforces this belief, but convinces him to catch the nearest way and achieve the throne through murder. Remorse, guilt and fear for his own survival drive him on to create a reign of terror and self-perpetuating violence. He creates more and more enemies, and finally Malcolm claims the throne with a moral authority Macbeth never had. Macbeth's ambition is merely one factor in a complex web of forces that lead to the moral order being overthrown and eventually to Macbeth's own downfall. So again, we've got this clear contention that yes, he's ambitious, but that his ambition is not the only thing that brings him down. Once again, though, they've used a quotation in here, which I sort of wouldn't do, but there's no right or wrong answers in how to do this. The main thing is you've got your contention and your ideas. Looking at topic sentences, I just wanted to flesh this out slightly. These are the 10 topic sentence verbs I like to go with. And I've got my little sentence started down the bottom. This is a great place to start with when you're initially writing essays, and as you grow more and more in confidence, you might go more away from this. You can also use connectives to start your topic sentences. So you might go with initially, or furthermore, moreover, additionally, ultimately, in the last main body paragraph. They can be used again. Some find those to be too explicit, but I think they're a really good way, particularly when you're starting off writing essays, to ensure that your ideas are clearly outlined. And we need to make sure that our topic sentences are explicit. We want to know exactly what the idea is in that topic sentence of that paragraph. We've got a list of explanation verbs in here. Excoriates is not included in this list, but could definitely go in there. And this definitely is not the only list of verbs that you can use for your explanation. The reason why I mention explanation verbs is because sometimes students have the tendency to bring in their evidence, but not to explain it. And these are just verbs which I think sort of ensure that you are definitely analysing your evidence. Another tip I like to use is to include Shakespeare's name in your analysis, because that, by using his name, it almost forces you to explain your evidence or analyse your evidence. So just be mindful of that as well. But again, some of my favourite ones are highlights, demonstrates, elucidates is one of my favourites, as well as underscores and connotes too. But excoriates you can use as well. In terms of banned terms in an essay, I definitely don't like using I, my, us, and we. If you are going to use the phrase we, that's probably okay to use, but I probably prefer the audience. You probably want to separate yourself from the audience, just as you do with an analysing argument essay. So avoid using we. Sometimes in a topic, they'll use the word we or us. And again, my advice is to use the phrase, the audience or the viewer, depending on what kind of text it is. You don't need to use the word essay. You don't need to use the word theme. They're really explicit words. So too is the word contention. That's really explicit as well. The word thing is too broad. Be specific. It could be a factor, an aspect, a trait, a characteristic, or a quality. So avoid using the word thing. Good and bad are really simplistic. Positive and negative are there as well. But you could also go with things like, optimistic, or pessimistic, challenging, difficult, rewarding. These are phrases that you can use instead of good or bad. I've mentioned the word contention. It's far too explicit. We don't need to mention that. We know you're going to have the contention. The word quote or quotes I don't really like. I prefer the word quotation if you are going to use it. But again, I think sometimes that leads us to being too explicit. We definitely don't want to use contractions either. That's a big no-no. So rather than using can't or won't, cannot or will not. Contractions are for speaking, not for writing. We want to avoid asking any questions as well. Remember, we're there to answer questions, not to ask them. So please avoid asking any questions in your essay. And again, that's just a short list of things that I would ban in my essays. So let's look at some final tips. The first thing I'd say is continuously draft and edit your work, and definitely to seek feedback, not just on full essays, but this can be for paragraphs as well. Seek feedback from your teacher. Consider using synonyms and reworking sentence structures to ensure you don't sound repetitive, especially with your topic sentences and your links, but take risks now. Use more sophisticated vocab now and take those risks. And think about words or phrases that seem to come up very often when we're talking about Macbeth. So ambition, the word ambition, the words power come up a lot. Perhaps create a synonym list for those words. Make sure you embed your quotations, and with that build quotation and idea banks. And look at a range of different topics to get a gauge on which ideas and evidence is flexible. So if you find that you're using the same evidence in the first 3 or 4 essays you've written, the chances are that that piece of evidence is quite malleable or flexible, so remember it. That's all from me for today though. Coming up very shortly over the next few days, we're going to have a video, which is a cheat sheet. It's going to provide you with all the quotations you need to know for all the key themes. Until then, remember that proper prior preparation prevents poor performance.